Welcome to the deep dive. I've been really into the whole theme of transformation and change lately, and you sent me this fascinating mix of stuff to really dig into this time. A YouTube video essay that looks at this abstract painting and analyzes it using like Zen and Taoist philosophy, and then this excerpt from an art book, too.
Yeah.
So I'm so curious to see like where this all takes us because we're talking like disintegrating figures and hexagrams even and like the concept of emptiness, which sounds pretty intense.
I think what you're hitting on there is that like this is going beyond just art analysis. We're actually going to try to use these sources to look at like the nature of change itself.
Totally. Okay, so let's start with this YouTube video because it's all about this painting called Birth of Venus II. And like the way they describe it, it's this totally wild, abstract piece. Like there are all these fragmented shapes and layers of lines and figures just like constantly appearing and vanishing.
Right. And the video brings in Zen philosophy to kind of try to interpret all that. And it highlights impermanence as like a really major concept in Zen Buddhism.
Yeah, and they keep mentioning this concept of mu or emptiness,
Yeah.
which honestly, it sounds a little bit over my head.
Mo is, it is kind of a tough concept to wrap your head around. But basically, it suggests that things don't actually have this like fixed or inherent essence,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
Instead, everything's like connected and constantly changing and shifting. So it's kind of like how we think of ourselves, right?
Mhm.
Like we have these ideas of who we are, but maybe those identities are always kind of evolving and in flux, like those figures in the artwork.
Whoa. Okay, so that's making me think about how in the past few years I've like changed careers and even moved across the country. And maybe instead of thinking about those as like separate events, it's all part of this like constant flow, this mu.
Exactly. And that's what's so cool about these sources. You know,
Mhm.
they're kind of challenging us to look at our own lives through this totally different lens.
Okay, so we have this idea of like constant change, right?
Yeah.
And then the video takes it even further by bringing in the I Ching, talking about hexagram 49 revolution molting.
Uh-huh.
Is that about change too?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about shedding the old to make way for the new. It's like fully embracing that upheaval is a part of growth, which makes total sense when you think about the artwork and how
Mhm.
chaotic it is, right? It's like out of this, like breaking down, there's always something new emerging.
It's interesting because both the video and the excerpts from the art book seem to point to this like cyclical nature of change. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like destruction and creation all kind of mixed together. So it's not just about endings, it's about something new always being born.
Yeah, and it's here where things get really interesting because the video actually introduces a Taoist perspective, referencing the teachings of Lao Tzu and the idea of aligning with the natural flow of the Tao.
So instead of like resisting change, which honestly I think is most people's like knee-jerk reaction, Taoism is saying we should actually try to embrace it. That sounds kind of hard.
Yeah, it can be, for sure. But the Taoist perspective is reminding us that change is literally the only constant. It's like woven into the fabric of existence. And by resisting, we're creating like unnecessary suffering for ourselves, right?
Right.
So what if instead we could learn to like move with it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like finding a sense of peace within the chaos.
That actually reminds me of this time when I was like so terrified to leave this job that I totally outgrew. But looking back, I can see how much I was resisting the change, but eventually taking that leap led to like all these amazing new opportunities.
Yeah, that's such a good example of how clinging to what's familiar, even when it's not serving us anymore, can actually cause way more suffering than the change itself.
Okay, so we've explored this video essay and like some of the big ideas it presents now. Let's dive into this art book excerpt because this seems to be offering like a more formal analysis of Birth of Venus II, right?
Yeah, definitely it gets into the stylistic influences of the painting. And it mentions abstract expressionism and artists like Jackson Pollock and Francis Bacon.
Yeah.
The book kind of points out how those like chaotic lines and distorted forms are expressing these raw emotions and like existential themes.
It also mentions cubism and surrealism, which is such a cool like blend of influences.
Right.
It makes me wonder, like, are there other art movements that also grapple with these ideas of change and impermanence?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
In fact, the way the book talks about abstract expressionism and like Pollock in particular is really interesting because, you know, his drip paintings also capture that sense of unbridled energy, almost like surrendering to something much bigger than yourself.
Uh-huh.
Does that resonate with you at all? Like those times in your life where you had to let go of control?
Oh, absolutely. It's like in those moments where I've been able to let go of trying to control everything, that's when the most unexpected and like exciting things have happened.
Yeah.
It's a little scary, but also kind of exhilarating.
Yeah, that fear and excitement. Maybe that's like what the artist was trying to get at in Birth of Venus the Second. And
Yeah.
the art book mentions something else that's really interesting. It says there might be like skeletal shapes and animal-like forms hidden within the chaos of the painting.
Oh, wow.
Makes you think, right, like what's going on beneath the surface?
What do you think those shapes could symbolize? I mean, they sound a little unsettling.
Hmm. I think they could represent those primal forces at play in transformation,
Hmm.
you know, like life and death and those survival instincts and the power of our subconscious. It's like this reminder that change isn't always pretty or comfortable.
This is giving me chills. And it brings us back to that question of impermanence, doesn't it? Like, what's changing in your life right now? What feels like it's dissolving or falling apart?
Hmm.
And how can we, like, start to see those things as opportunities for growth?
Those are like some really powerful questions. And I think we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
Let's take a closer look at how these sources can help us navigate those changes in our own lives.
Okay.
So
Yeah, let's do it.
it's easy to get kind of caught up in the fear of change, that feeling of loss that comes with it. But I think these sources are asking us to look at it from like a totally different perspective, to see impermanence not as an ending, but like this ongoing process of becoming.
I mean, that's like a pretty big mental shift, right?
Hmm.
But how do we actually, like, apply that to our lives? How do we go from just thinking about it to, like, embracing change?
I think that's where the art comes in, because like Birth of Venus the Second isn't just representing change. It's actually inviting us to experience it, to like sit with that discomfort and the uncertainty and see what comes out of that.
So are you saying it's more about leaning into the chaos than trying to control it? And honestly, my first instinct is always to try and like control things.
Exactly. And the video essay talks about how the artwork encourages this kind of like meditative exploration of how existence flows. It's
Yeah.
about letting go of the need for those like fixed meanings and just being present in the moment.
That sounds a lot like mindfulness practice, right? Like just noticing the changes inside of us and around us without like judging them as good or bad. Have you found that helpful in your own life?
Oh, it's been huge for me, especially when dealing with like big changes. And the art book excerpt kind of adds to this by suggesting that the fragmented forms in the artwork could actually represent like those internal struggles and fears that often come with transformation. It's like acknowledging that change can be messy and even painful sometimes.
It's like the artwork is giving us permission to feel the whole range of emotions that come with change, not just like the excitement of new beginnings, but also the sadness of letting go.
Right. And by acknowledging those like more difficult emotions, we can actually begin to move through them,
Yeah.
you know, instead of getting stuck. And that's how we can find that sense of freedom amidst all the flux, like the Taoists teach.
That reminds me of this time when I went through this pretty bad breakup and like I was devastated, but looking back, it was such a huge turning point in my life. I
Mhm.
learned so much about myself and what I actually wanted.
That's a great example of how something we initially perceive as like negative or destructive
Hmm.
can actually lead to some pretty incredible growth. But it does take courage to face those challenges and see that potential within them.
It makes me wonder, like, what are some practical ways we can cultivate that courage? If someone's listening and they're really struggling with change in their life, what advice would you give them?
One thing that has helped me is remembering that change is a process, not like an event. It's not about like instantly flipping a switch and becoming this like new person. It's about taking small steps, being patient with ourselves, and remembering that it's totally okay to feel like a whole mix of emotions along the way.
I love that it's like a reminder that we don't have to have it all figured out right away. We can allow ourselves to be in the process to embrace that messiness of it all.
Yeah, for sure. And another practical tip is to like cultivate a supportive community around you. Having people who get what you're going through can make like a world of difference, whether it's friends, family, a therapist, or even like an online community. Having that support system can be so invaluable during times of transition.
That's so important because it's easy to feel isolated when you're going through a big change. So having those connections can really help to like ground you and remind you that you're not alone.
Absolutely. And then on a more personal level, practices like journaling, meditation, or even just spending time in nature can be super helpful too. These practices can help us connect with our own inner wisdom, process our emotions, and find a sense of peace amidst the chaos.
Those are all great suggestions, and I think it's important to remember that there's no one size fits all approach to dealing with change. What
Yeah.
works for one person might not work for another. So it's really about finding what resonates with you and experimenting with different techniques until you find what helps you like navigate those transitions with more grace and ease.
Totally agree. And remember, even though change can be unsettling, it's also this huge opportunity for growth and renewal.
Mhm.
It's a chance to let go of old patterns that aren't serving us anymore and embrace new possibilities that align with who we're becoming.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I'm feeling inspired to approach the changes in my life with like this renewed sense of openness and curiosity. It's not about fearing the unknown, but seeing it as like an adventure, right?
Exactly. And remember, transformation isn't just about these big life-altering events. It's happening all the time in these small, subtle ways. Each breath we take, each thought we have is like a tiny transformation. So it's about tuning in to that constant flow of change and finding the beauty in like the impermanence of it all.
I love that it's a reminder that even in the midst of all the chaos, there's this constant hum of creation and possibility.
That's the magic of it all. And as we kind of wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'd encourage you to reflect on where you see these small transformations happening in your own life.
Yeah.
You know, like what subtle shifts are taking place? What new possibilities are like emerging?
These are great questions to ponder, and when we come back for the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore how these sources can help us not just understand change, but like actually participate in it, becoming co-creators of our own lives. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into transformation, and I gotta say, after exploring these sources, I'm kind of struck by like the sheer power and like inevitability of change.
It is pretty humbling, right? Like we try so hard to control our lives, but in the end, we're all just kind of riding the waves of change.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But there's also the sense of hope that comes through in both like the video essay and the art book excerpt. It's like they're both saying change can be super unsettling, but it's also where this incredible beauty and growth comes from.
I think that is like a really key takeaway.
Mm.
You know, transformation can feel chaotic or even destructive sometimes, but it's also a chance for renewal, for shedding those old patterns and embracing these like new possibilities.
And like the artwork itself, Birth of Venus II, it like visually represents this, you know what I mean? Like those fragmented forms and those figures constantly appearing and disappearing. They're like this testament to that constant flux of existence.
It's like a call to action too,
Yeah.
like it's asking us to face our own impermanence, to ask ourselves, like, what needs to be released for something new to emerge?
That's such a powerful question. It's like the artwork is holding up this mirror to our lives, making us think about where we might be clinging to like beliefs or identities that aren't serving us anymore.
Right. And it's encouraging us to approach those areas with like curiosity and compassion, not fear, you
Mhm.
know, to like really see the beauty in letting go.
At the beginning of this whole deep dive, I felt a little overwhelmed by the idea of change, but now I'm actually kind of excited. It's like I'm ready to embrace the unknown and just see what happens.
I love that that's the impact these sources can have, you know? They give us this new way to understand change, one that's rooted in like ancient wisdom and modern art. But how do we go beyond just understanding and actually become like active participants in the whole process of transformation?
That's a great question. The video essay talked about how Birth of Venus II encourages viewers to like meditate on the flow of existence. Is that kind of what you mean by becoming active participants?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. When we meditate, we're practicing being present with like whatever arises, without judgment, and that same skill can totally be applied to navigating change. So instead of resisting or trying to force things, we can just observe what's happening, allow ourselves to feel our emotions, and trust that even in the midst of all the uncertainty, there's like this deeper wisdom at play.
So it's about surrendering to the process rather than trying to control it. But that doesn't mean we like become passive, right?
Right? It's not about passivity at all. It's about recognizing that we're not always in control. You know, there are forces larger than ourselves at work, but within that flow, we still have choices to make. We can choose how we respond to those challenges. We can choose to align ourselves with the direction life is taking us. It's kind of like this dance between surrender and action.
I love that analogy. It's like we're learning to dance with the rhythm of change instead of fighting against it.
Exactly. And as we become more attuned to that rhythm, we discover the sense of freedom and creativity
Yeah.
within the whole process of transformation. So it's no longer something to be feared, but like this source of energy and inspiration.
This has been such an insightful conversation. Thank you so much for helping me, and hopefully our listener kind of reframe how we think about change. It's not the end, it's a beginning, like this continuous journey towards becoming whole.
Beautifully said. And remember, change is happening all around us all the time. Even the smallest adjustments can have like these huge ripple effects. So if you go about your day, just notice those subtle shifts. What opportunities for growth are presenting themselves? How can you lean into those opportunities with curiosity and courage?
That's such a great reminder for all of us. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into transformation. But the exploration doesn't have to end here. Remember the artwork, Burst of Venus the Second, and all those different interpretations. Where do you see transformation happening in your own life? And how can you embrace it not as an ending, but as a new beginning? Until next time, keep diving deep.